are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joined with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. So we're now, the end of the season's over. We're now officially in the off season, and today, the day that we're recording this, is the first official day of free agency. Well, the moratorium.
The moratorium, yeah.
Yeah, and it's an exciting day, man. To be fair, we didn't really plan on making this episode until afterwards, but we were like, why not?
Yeah.
Well, so in this episode, we're going to be basically recapping or kind of giving you guys some of our thoughts on the first day of free agency and some of the massive signings and trades that have just gone down within the last 3 hours. All this stuff has just come to us, man, and you gotta love the NBA offseason, man.
The NBA offseason is definitely one of the biggest NBA and most fun NBA events of the year.
Yeah.
I would say the offseason of the NBA probably rivals that of any sport.
I think it could be better, honestly.
It probably is the best just because of the fact that the contracts in the NBA are just, massive and then, very short as well, right? So comparatively to other sports.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the NBA offseason is always very, very interesting. And, this offseason wasn't shaping up to be something too crazy compared to, for example, like previous offseasons we've had recently. But it's still been a pretty crazy offseason. This is just being the first 3 hours of not even the official NBA free agency.
Yeah, these are just deals that have been agreed to. And again, we're getting details as we go along. So if there is some added detail that we do get, I have Twitter open as well, just in case. So we will be updating you guys as we see them.
And again, we won't be able to get to everything that's happened because it's quite a lot. But we're going to be focusing on some of the bigger ones, and then maybe talking for a little bit about some of the smaller signings and trades that happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, once again, if you don't hear your favorite team's signings or whatnot, we apologize for that. This is a 1 hour episode.
Yeah.
We don't have enough time to cover everything.
We don't have a ton of time. But starting us off and just diving right into some of the moves, we'll start off with probably the first move that dropped right at 6 p.m. Today. It was the Chicago Bulls actually signing restricted free agent Lonzo Ball to a 4-year, $85 million contract, which is actually going to be facilitated via a sign-and trade with the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans would receive Tomas Satoransky, Garrett Temple, and a second-round pick. Now, for the Chicago Bulls, man, they were looking for a point guard. They were looking for someone to pair with Zach LaVine in the backcourt. They still have Kobe White, obviously, but again, they can use him as more of a bench piece. I know Bulls fans are kind of low on Kobe White. I still like the guy, but in terms of getting Lonzo Ball, he definitely works well with what they have going on. He's a player that he loves to play make, loves to get guys involved, can spread the floor occasionally, but when you're talking about a guy that can feed Zach LaVine, that's something that Lonzo definitely brings to the table here for the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, man, it was actually a pretty good pickup for the Chicago Bulls. Like you mentioned, he's a guy that can facilitate for the Chicago Bulls, which is exactly what they need with a guy like Zach LaVine being there as your go-to scorer, and then as a pick-and-roll, pick-and-pop option in the middle with Nikola Vucevic, right? And he can spread the floor. He can spread the ball around the floor. What he also does for you is on the opposite end of the ball, on the defensive end. He gives you another layer of versatility on the defensive end where, you kind of need some capable point of attack defenders, especially because of the fact that you are relying on Nikola Vucevic to man the middle, which, again, he's gotten better, but he's still not going to be the greatest defender, right? So what you have to be able to focus on is your point of attack defense. And Lonzo Ball really helps in that regard. Zach LaVine's, not a great defender either. So you're going to really need Lonzo Ball to be that number one defender at times for the Chicago Bulls, where they clearly did not have one last year. Patrick Williams is probably going to be that guy for them moving forward. But again, you want somebody at the point of attack, which is what a guy like Lonzo Ball can do for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, even adding Lonzo to some of the young players, like obviously you have LaVine, Patrick Williams, Kobe White. They have some nice pieces in Chicago. Now, flipping things to the Pelican side of things, obviously, contract negotiations kind of stalled between Lonzo and the Pelicans. And, I think all accounts were kind of pointing towards Lonzo leaving the Pelicans in free agency. So at least the Pelicans were able to get something back for Lonzo Ball. Again, it's not the greatest return in the world. Thomas Satoransky is a decent player, but he's not a world beater. He's not gonna, he's not a superstar level player. Garrett Temple, again, decent role player for the team. And then the second round pick it's a second round pick.
Yeah, man, the Pelicans really didn't have any other choices. So the package they received is subpar, but I mean, it is something. I would say overall for this move, if we're gonna grade this move, first of all, for the Bulls, I think we would give this a B+ for the Bulls.
It was a solid move.
It's not the greatest move, I think, for Chicago especially, but it's a pretty good move.
I think from the B+ kind of comes to the point where it's a bit of an overpay for Lonzo Ball because, again, $85 million is about $21 million a season, roughly. And when you're talking about a guy in Lonzo who's had injury concerns, has a bit of inconsistency in his game, is a bit concerning. Again, you're committing that much money to, but considering the market, it's kind of standard nowadays. And then for the Pelicans, we're gonna give it a C, just because they really didn't have many options, out of the situation. So they kind of did what they had to do. I mean, the fact that they recouped anything is still somewhat of a win for the Pelicans.
Yeah, continuing on with the Chicago Bulls, who actually just signed right before we recorded this episode, Alex Caruso reportedly to a 4-year, $37 million contract. This is also a very interesting signing for the Chicago Bulls and helps them out with their guard depth even further. Now we're talking about a trio of, for example, Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, and Kobe White. Now, Kobe White's future is obviously still up in the air in Chicago. But, having those two guys, Lonzo and Alex Caruso, is actually a very, very solid point guard duo. Alex Caruso can do a lot of the same things that Lonzo Ball does. He's a very good, he's a high IQ player. He's not the facilitator that Lonzo Ball is, but he's another guy that you can plug into a floor. He just makes the right plays. He makes winning plays. There's a reason why he was a starter in the finals, right? So he makes those winning plays. He helps you out. He brings that energy to the team. And then on the defensive end, he's another guy that can help you out at the point of attack on the defensive end, and can help you, shut down the floor defensively for a team that really struggled defensively last year.
Well, yeah, that's kind of where I was focusing on. Like, for the defense, I think it helps the Bulls a lot, honestly. Bringing a guy in Alex Caruso in there. Zeeshan and I were actually talking about the episode. We weren't even thinking that we thought the Lakers were going to try to retain Caruso, especially with some of the other moves that they made. But Caruso was able to get more money. I'm assuming more money out of the Bulls, and probably a bigger opportunity because he's going to be on a younger team. He's going to be able to showcase himself a little bit more so than what he would be on a veteran-heavy team. So definitely a decent move by Chicago getting Alex Caruso, man.
I would give this like an A-, honestly.
It's an A-. It's not an expensive contract, and you're getting a player who, like you said, makes the right play. And for a young team, that's pretty important.
I will say this before we move on to the next one as well. Chicago's defense was statistically pretty good last year, but anyone who watched them can tell they kind of overachieved a bit on that end. But, with these added in players, I think their defense will be very solid moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us into the next signing that we have to talk about. It's going to be pretty quick because they've only made one move so far, but we're going to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers actually re-signing the restricted free agent Jarrett Allen to 5-year, $100 million contract. And again, even though Cleveland drafted Evan Mobley in the draft, still keep retaining a guy like Jarrett Allen is definitely important. And it definitely makes a ton of sense for them to do so. He's young. He's a modern day big. He fits what you want out of a big man in today's game. And it's a pretty team friendly deal in terms of it's only $20 million a season, and you got him locked up for 5 years. So it's a pretty solid move for Cleveland. And now you have a pretty young, solid front court with the Mobley and Jarrett Allen for the next few years.
Exactly. To your point about Evan Mobley, you can put him in at the 4. You can slot him in at the 4. And Jarrett Allen does everything you want from a modern-day center. Not to mention the fact that he won't take up any of the ball. He won't take up any scoring duties that will fall on Darius Garland, Evan Mobley. He doesn't demand the ball. He doesn't need the ball. He can play his role, be a superb defender on one end, be a lob threat on the other, and be a rebounder. So Jarrett Allen, signing him, was he like 23, 22, whatever he is?
He's pretty young, man.
He's very, very young. To lock him in for 5 years, and like you mentioned, $20 million a season is pretty standard value for today's market for a center like him. the Cleveland Cavaliers were able to re-sign him, especially since he was a restricted free agent. And there were a lot of suitors for him, namely our Toronto Raptors.
Yeah.
So for the Cleveland Cavaliers to be able to re-sign Jarrett Allen, I think was a huge move for them. And we'll definitely give this a A-.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, again, like you mentioned with the Raptors, like teams are going to definitely be interested in a player like Jarrett Allen, but he's a restricted free agent, and that's the leverage a team has in restricted free agency, that they're able to offer the 5th year and they're able to kind of, pay a little bit more because they have the rights to the player. Mm-hmm. Which brings us into the team that has obviously made the biggest splash in free agency so far. And for all accounts, they might not even be done.
Probably not, honestly.
Probably not. We're going to talk about the Miami Heat. And the Miami Heat made a ton of moves. Obviously, the biggest one that they made today was they signed Kyle Lowry. Well, they're going to be signing and trading Kyle Lowry for a 3-year, approximately $90 million deal. Now, obviously, the sign and trade details aren't actually official yet. I think Toronto is obviously looking for potentially a third partner involved. But the rumor is that, Toronto would possibly receive Goran Dragic, who they were probably going to flip to a third team, Precious Achiuwa, and a first-round pick. That is the reported deal from the Miami's perspective. And, man, it just makes a ton of sense, man. For Miami to go after a guy like Kyle Lowry, who, again, is very close with Jimmy Butler, but also Lowry kind of fits what Miami's trying to build there. He is a veteran point guard, plays hard on the defensive end, and, we've seen Lowry for years, man. He will make any team that he's on better, and I think him going to Miami, man, it just makes so much sense for them.
Exactly, like you said, the fit is perfect in Miami. He has great chemistry with Jimmy Butler already. He's Jimmy Butler's daughter's godfather or son's godfather, whatever it is. So he's very close with Jimmy Butler already. And then, the on-court fit, he fits the Miami culture. He fits that blue-collar style of, work hard on the defensive end, go out there and get it. And not to mention the fact that on the offensive end, he's another guy that can stretch the floor for you. He's a guy that's going to be able to facilitate, take over ball handling duties from Jimmy Butler, be able to run that vaunted pick and roll with Bam Adebayo. And he's just going to be able to work so well within that Eric Spoelstra offense and defense. So he just makes life so much better for you, for the Miami Heat and their championship aspirations moving forward. Not to mention the fact that, again, it is only a 3-year contract, right? So you won't be locked into a 4 or 5 year contract per se.
And again, it is pretty hefty. Like Lowry's making about $30 million per year, but when you think about the value, like Miami, like Pat Riley's basically going all in. He wants to win a championship next season, and I think making a move like this definitely, and some of the other moves we'll actually touch upon, it definitely makes it so that he has a very good chance of doing so. But just to touch upon it, obviously as Raptor fans, we clearly have Kyle Lowry and we hold him in high regard. He's the greatest Raptor of all time, and we are going to miss him obviously on our team. But we understand that he's in the stage of his career where he should be able to compete for a championship, multiple championships, and he will always forever be a Raptor. This number 7 is going to be in the rafters at Scotiabank Arena. So, and there will be a statue outside of Kyle Lowry at Scotiabank Arena as well. So shout out to Kyle Lowry. Will be missed. Wish him the best in Miami. But speaking of more moves that the Miami Heat made, another move they made was they re-signed Duncan Robinson to a 5-year, $90 million contract. Honestly speaking, I feel like this was a bit of an overpay for Duncan Robinson. Now, obviously, this is going to be about $18 million a season, and it's apparently the biggest deal signed by an undrafted player. As you all know, like I think last year, a couple years ago was Fred VanVleet. Last year signing a deal as being the highest by any undrafted player, and now Duncan Robinson is one-upping him a year later. Again, Miami wanted to keep him. He definitely has a great asset to his game, which is the shooting. But I think it's a bit of an overpay from my perspective, at least.
Yeah, I think Connie's lower on this re-signing than I am. Now, again, I will agree it might be a little bit of an overpay. But at the end of the day, I think this is what the market is for a guy of Duncan Robinson's caliber. If you're a top 5 player at what you do, I think this is the market. Duncan Robinson is a top 5, 3-point shooter. He proved that in the NBA Finals 2 years ago when, for example, teams were doubling him off of curls and whatnot, and he was still getting to 5-6 threes a game. So Duncan Robinson, he's very important for what Miami does, especially given the fact that you have a facilitator at the center spot like Bam Adebayo. You have a facilitator like Jimmy Butler. And we know what Eric Spoelstra's offense, how important Duncan Robinson running off of those screens are, running off the top is. So I think from Miami's perspective, they had to get this deal done. Now, Tani's point, it might be a little bit of overpay, but this was one of those moves where I think if you're in on a championship right now, you swallow the cost of it, right?
Yeah, not to mention, again, because he was a restricted free agent, Miami has a ton of control. So, again, we'd have to grade this a B, to be honest with you, as an overall signing. The Miami Heat are also expected to sign Jimmy Butler to a 4-year, $184 million max extension. This is a complete win for Miami. This makes a ton of sense. Keep Jimmy for another 4 years, which gives you, basically, you have a 3-year championship window now with Jimmy, Kyle Lowry, and, Bam Adebayo. So it's definitely a safe bet, and it's, again, no, we don't have to spend a ton of time with this. It's Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, then
you retain your best player.
Exactly. And then finally, Miami Heat also just signed, or reportedly signed, PJ Tucker to
this happened right before we recorded.
Yeah, 2-year, $15 million contract. This is another great move for Miami. Now, again, PJ Tucker isn't the same player he once was in, for example, Houston and Phoenix, but he just won a championship. You saw the role he played in that championship run. He's not going to put up the points he once was, but he's going to be another veteran player out there for you. He's going to be another tough defender. And not to mention, he, again, is another guy that fits the Miami culture, right? They always get guys that fit their culture, and those blue-collar guys that are going to work hard.
Listen, PJ's ring chasing now. He doesn't care. He won one, and he's like, I'm not letting this feeling go ever again. I'm going to keep winning over and over again.
And he could have gone to any team that he wanted to, basically.
Could have re-signed in Milwaukee.
Exactly. And, for him to go to Miami, I think that's a great pickup for Miami, and I think it's a great move for PJ Tucker as well.
Yeah. One final point on the Miami Heat, though. We aren't going to, for the Kyle Lowry sign and trade, it is going to be an A for the Miami, as far as the grading for the Miami Heat. We're not able to give a grade yet for the Toronto Raptors, so we don't know the full extent of their return yet. So that will be we're going to be waiting on that one. But overall, Miami's made some huge moves so far in free agency. Which brings us over into the next team that we want to kind of talk about a few of their signings, and it's the New York Knicks. This is going to be fun for me because, again, we all know where I stand with the New York Knicks. So the New York Knicks have a ton of cap space, right? Heading into this offseason, right? They had a lot of space. They had a pretty good year, to be honest with you. But you know what? They decided, okay, we're going to re-sign Nerlens Noel. 3 years, $32 million contract.
That's not bad.
It's not a bad deal. But it's Nerlens Noel, who turned down $80 million. Remember,
he's never going to let... Hey, Dennis Schroeder is about to be added to that list.
Dennis Schroeder will probably be added to that list too. But you know what? They re-signed Nerlens Noel. Not bad. They also re-signed Alec Burks to a 3-year, $30 million contract.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Again, a pretty affordable, tradable. It's not a bad contract. But then we get to where the real cap space kind of went for the New York Knicks. So they re-signed Derrick Rose to a 3-year, $43 million deal. Now remember, this is $14.3 million over the next 3 seasons for a player that, again, is beloved by a lot of people, and including us. We do love Derrick Rose. But he has history with injuries, and he's going to most likely be your 6th man. So you spent $43 million on Derrick Rose. Again, I don't hate this one as much as the next one, but that's that's a lot of money you're throwing at Derrick Rose.
Listen, man, Derrick Rose, he played a vital role for the New York Knicks. I don't hate the move as much as you because of the fact that Derrick Rose probably was the Knicks' best player. He was the Knicks' best player in the playoffs. And he played a huge role for them, especially even as a 6th man, and then he started eventually in the playoffs. But again, it is $14 million for a guy who does have an injury history. And this isn't pushing the needle for the New York Knicks.
It's not.
Is what I'm saying.
Like, again, so far the Knicks have just re-signed the guys they've had, they had last season, which is fine. They had a decent year. But now you go out and you sign Evan Fournier to a 4-year, $78 million deal. Okay, so now you're paying Derrick Rose and Evan Fournier a combined $121 million over the next 4 years. That is a lot of money for a player that, honestly speaking, you could have used this cap space to go after a bigger guy. You could have gone after, I think maybe you could have given some of this money to DeMar DeRozan, for instance. Or, there were other players out there, but you decided, okay, we're going to just spend this money on Evan Fournier, Derrick Rose, and yeah, there goes all your cap space, New York. So,
listen, man, don't get twisted. We like Derrick Rose. I like Evan Fournier.
Yeah.
They're both good players, man.
But these are overpays.
But Evan Fournier getting a $78 million deal, I don't know how I feel about that, man. He's a good player, but to give that guy $78 million,
$19 million a year.
Again, it's not. These moves are not going to push the needle for you, especially in the market that New York is. New York expects winning results. We know what their fan base is like. And Evan Fournier is not going to push the needle for you, unfortunately. He's a very good piece to have on for example, championship contending team. But for the New York Knicks, like Hani mentioned, this cap space could have gone somewhere else. So I think in the case of both moves, the Derrick Rose and the Evan Fournier moves, we're going to have to give this a B.
Yeah. And a bit of breaking news before we move on. Just a continuation of kind of the Lonzo Ball kind of situation with the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans are doing a sign-in trade with Charlotte for restricted free agent Devontae Graham. Devontae Graham will be on a 4-year, $47 million contract. And a first-round pick is reportedly heading over to the New Orleans Pelicans. Definitely helps out New Orleans, getting them a point guard now, getting them a shooter to go, to be put next to Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. So not a bad replacement for Lonzo Ball for New Orleans. And this news just broke by Woj at this right now.
Yeah, for the Pelicans, I guess, they were rumored to be looking for a bunch of point guards. And it looks like they ended up with Devontae Graham. Now, Devontae Graham, again, he had a little bit of a down year last year, or at least expectation-wise. But he's definitely still a very nice young point guard to have moving forward for the Pelicans, and especially a guy who can score and facilitate in that young system.
And the cap hit's not bad at all. I mean, again, it's 4 years of $47 million. So what is that, around $11, $12 million a season?
Yeah,
it's not bad at all.
It's not a bad move for the New Orleans Pelicans, and
yeah.
I'll give that maybe B plus.
B plus.
Yeah, B plus.
B plus is kind of what we put it at.
Yeah.
Which brings us into the next team that we want to talk to. Now, this is the team that we always love. We love and dear. It's the Toronto Raptors. Now, the Raptors re-signed Gary Trent Jr. to a 3-year, $54 million contract. Now, Gary Trent Jr. was a restricted free agent, and he was the big piece the Raptors acquired for Norman Powell at the trade deadline. And Gary really impressed with the Raptors in terms of
at least
his potential.
Immediately. His potential.
Yeah.
Yes.
So immediately he came in, he was hitting his career high in points. He was scoring. He was shooting the ball really well. Obviously, he hit a ceiling, kind of plateaued, and kind of fell off closer to the end of the year. But there is no denying the potential with Gary Trent Jr. is there. He's 22 years of age. He can definitely shoot the ball pretty well, and he can be a very capable defender. Obviously, I think the Raptors want to develop him more as a playmaker. They want to develop more of his mid-range game.
And his finishing, especially.
And his finishing ability. But again, he has shown flashes. This is a bit of an overpay in terms of how much money we actually expected him to be getting. But again, the Raptors, it's a 2+1 in terms of, so it's a 3-year deal with the last year being a player option. So it's not a very long-term commitment by the Raptors. And for them, they're banking a lot on their potential. He's a 22-year-old guy who should and could get better. So
yeah, initially you think the average is $18 million a year averaging for Gary Trent Jr. It's we know that's what he wanted as market, but given the way he performed at the end of the year, we're saying maybe his value went down. But again, if you look at the contract, it's not that bad. It's a 2+1, like Hani said. It's a very short-term deal, and again, if he outplays his expectations, you can possibly bring him back, and obviously the bird rights and whatnot will be involved in that. And again, the end of the season was not great for Gary Trent, but we have to also remember the beginning of the his Raptors stint, where he was hitting 40+ points, where he was hitting his career highs, where he was shooting the ball great, and you saw all of the potential with him moving forward, especially in this young core that the Raptors now have, with, for example, Scottie Barnes, Malachi Flynn, Pascal, OG. You add in another guy who can play for you on both ends of the court, who's another tough guy, another hard-nosed guy, another guy that's going to work hard for you. And there's a lot to like moving forward with the Toronto Raptors and Gary Trent Jr.
Not to mention with Gary Trent is that, he was obviously brought in at the trade deadline, so he actually hasn't had a full, training camp and kind of a lot of time to really acclimate himself.
Not to mention they were in Florida too, right?
And they were in Tampa. So I think now next season, hopefully the Raptors are going to be in Toronto. He's going to have a full training camp with the team, learn the system, have another year in the system. So he should be better next year for the Raptors as well. So in terms of a grade for this one, we're going to give it a B+. Definitely think that it's a pretty good signing for both the Raptors and for Gary Trent Jr. So definitely a pretty decent move by the Raptors. Which brings us into the next team that we want to talk about, who've been decently busy this offseason. Obviously, we'll get into their bigger move a little later. But the Los Angeles Lakers have been a little busy this offseason. Obviously, their end to the season last year was pretty disappointing in terms of for any basketball fans. Like, if you're the Los Angeles Lakers, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and you got bounced in the first round.
Well, again, and the disappointing thing about it too was that we literally did not really see LeBron or AD.
Yeah, right. We didn't see any of those two stars playing. So the Lakers really needed to retool and kind of regroup. Obviously, they lost some depth in the move they made, which, again, we'll talk about. But they're now trying to recoup some depth. So the first player they obviously went out and signed was Trevor Ariza. They signed him to a 1-year deal. Now, Ariza reportedly was last time he was on the Lakers, he won a championship with them. But again, Ariza apparently had a beef with LeBron and he never wanted to be his teammate, apparently.
Yeah, well, the whole beef between Trevor Ariza and LeBron was pretty funny because of the fact that just the trajectories of their careers. But, Trevor Ariza has built out a great career for himself, respectfully, in the NBA. He's another guy that every team wants, especially veteran-heavy teams who are trying to contend for a championship. He's another 3-and-D guy, veteran guy that you can plug into a system. Not to mention, like you said, he's already been part of the LA Lakers before and won the championship with them back in 2009 with Kobe Bryant, rest in peace. So Trevor Ariza now joining that core of LeBron and AD is definitely a pretty solid pickup for the Los Angeles Lakers, especially as they're, like you mentioned, they're trying to recoup some depth. They also signed Wayne Ellington to a 1-year deal. And Wayne Ellington, coincidentally, is also going back to the LA Lakers. And so is the next guy we're going to talk about. All three of them are all returning to the LA Lakers, where they once played at one point or another. Now, Wayne Ellington, his value's kind of dropped a little bit in the last couple of years from where he was at in his Miami days. If you remember, he was one of the most coveted shooters during his Miami stint, and he was great for them. Again, he's not the same player he once was, but he can still shoot the ball very well. And that's literally what the Lakers
need shooting.
They need shooting bad, bro. Previous to these signings, the Los Angeles Lakers' best three-point shooter was LeBron James. Again, LeBron's become a pretty good three-point shooter at this point in his career, but to have LeBron as your best three-point shooter, it's not great.
No, it's not.
So for Wayne Ellington, for them to be able to pick up Wayne Ellington, again, it's probably going to be a very cheap,
I think it's a vet man, honestly. Yeah. And another guy that, again, Zeeshan alluded to, the Lakers brought back was Dwight Howard. Obviously, it was a mistake for them to let Dwight walk in free agency last year after him helping them win a championship. Honestly speaking, Dwight Howard was a major part of the Lakers rotation, really gave them energy off the bench, gave them a deep, an anchor on at least at the center spot. And that was a big weakness for the Lakers this past season. They didn't really have anyone to fill the void that JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard left because the Lakers just let them walk in free agency. So getting Dwight back is obviously rectifying that and correcting that mistake by letting him walk in the first place.
And not to mention, like you said, he was a high-energy guy, not just on the court for you, but off the court. You could really tell the Lakers missed some of that chemistry that guys like JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard played in that locker room. And that's why you need guys like that in those locker rooms to go and get championships. Those guys are very, very important. And for them to be able to bring him back, especially when he clearly wanted to stay in LA all along, is a pretty solid pickup for the Lakers.
Yeah. So moving on into the next team, obviously we're going to have to talk about the runner-up of the 2021 season, the Phoenix Suns. Now, the Phoenix Suns, their first move, they re-signed Chris Paul to a 4-year deal worth $120 million. So obviously that's $30 million a season. I mean, again, Chris Paul was just changed, gave them that extra boost that they needed to get themselves to go on this magical playoff run that they did. Again, obviously the Phoenix Suns fell short in the NBA Finals, but there's no denying they would not have been there had Chris Paul not have been on that team. So bringing him back on a cheaper cap hit than what he was on his previous deal is pretty solid deal. My only concern is the 4 years.
Yes.
So again,
that's exactly what I was gonna bring up, right? For the Phoenix Suns perspective, yes, you have to bring back Chris Paul, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
He helped you reach your first finals since 1993.
Yeah.
However, that 4-year deal with $30 million each season, especially for a guy that's had a massive injury history, especially a very inopportune injury history, is not great. And now, again, this season, he was relatively more healthy than he had been previously. But we once again saw the injury bug hit him in the playoffs. Yeah. And he was able to play through it and play spectacularly through it. But again, it didn't help the Phoenix Suns when he would miss those couple of games or those possessions where he had to take off in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So, from the Phoenix Suns perspective, this was kind of something you had to do. However, again, the years and the amount.
To be fair, I think CP3 wanted the 4 years, to be honest with you. If thinking from his perspective, I think he would have wanted that long.
No, it's a great contract for Chris Paul, for sure.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how he's making, Chris Paul makes the same amount of money as Kyle Lowry, but apparently he's not as good as Kyle Lowry, but Kyle Lowry has more rings than Chris Paul. So, yes, we're still having that debate.
I think it's the other way around.
It's kind of funny now. But speaking of giving Chris Paul some rest and hopefully keeping him a little bit healthy, the Phoenix Suns also re-signed Cameron Payne to a 3-year, $19 million deal.
Shout out Cam Payne.
Honestly speaking, us included, we were kind of dogging on him, because he was looking to be an NBA journeyman, going from team to team. He found a home for himself in Phoenix, really played his ass off, and really played well, performed well in the playoffs, which was so huge for Phoenix. He put up a lot of great playoff moments for the Phoenix Suns. Really helped them actually off the bench, just creating a spark when they needed it. And it was pretty impressive to see.
Yeah, man, Cameron Payne deserves all this money that he's getting, especially from where he was at a few years ago in Chicago, for example, where, he was known as the worst player in the league. To come to Phoenix last year in the bubble, to have the performance that he did to end off the season for Phoenix, and then in this year to be that stabilizing presence off the bench, and then to up that production in the playoffs even further and be that energy spark for Phoenix, to be a defensive tough-minded guy for Phoenix, and then play great on the offensive end as well. Cameron Payne definitely deserves the money that he's getting. Yeah. One more addition that the Phoenix Suns also made is signing JaVale McGee to a 1-year, $5 million deal. And again, this is just another good pickup for the Phoenix Suns, another depth piece. It's another locker room guy that can bring energy.
It's insurance in case of an injury to what happened in the playoffs with Dario Saric.
Exactly.
Now you have a capable center to bring off the bench to give DeAndre Ayton much needed rest, because they're gonna need him.
And you really saw how much the Phoenix Suns struggled without Dario Saric. It was a massive difference to not have that one guy off of the bench who can back up DeAndre Ayton.
Again, Frank Kaminsky did his best, but he's Frank Kaminsky. So you got to bring in a player that has some experience, that knows his role. And JaVale McGee, again, he's 3-time champion JaVale McGee, so we got to show him that respect. Bringing us into JaVale McGee's former team, the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets made some pretty decent moves. Obviously heading into this offseason. Again, the previous season, last season was pretty injury riddled for them. Nikola Jokic won MVP, which is fantastic for him. But in terms of their team, it was just riddled by injuries. So
listen, man, for them, the main priority for them was to just try and run it back. Their team was looking to win a championship last season, and like Hani said, the injuries just decimated that completely. So their main priority, again, just run it back.
Run it back, and exactly, they re-signed JaMychal Green, which was the first move that they did, to a 2-year, $17 million deal. I got no issues with the deal, to be honest with you. JaMychal Green played very well for them.
He's been a good player in his career.
He's been a good player, and again, this is not a bad deal. This is what, $8 million this season, $8.5 million this season. I can't complain about that money at all for JaMychal Green. Again, it's a very movable deal as well, so in case they do need to move it, they can. They also re-signed Will Barton to a 2-year, $32 million contract. A steal of a contract for the Denver Nuggets. I mean, this was a very team-friendly deal. Like, you're talking about a player in Will Barton that was one of your better players in this season, and the fact that this guy only signed for less than $14-15 million a season.
Oh, it's $16 million a season, but it's only 2 years.
Yeah, $16 million for 2 years is solid.
Well, the main reason why he had to take that small contract, and he did get a pay raise. He did get a slight pay raise, but obviously he was looking for, one of those 4-year, maybe $60 million contracts, I would guess is what he was looking for. Unfortunately, the injuries throughout Will Barton's career have pretty much hampered his production. Otherwise, he's been a great player since he got to Denver. And then Denver Nuggets also signed Jeff Green to a 2-year, $10 million deal to round off today's day. And again, this is just another good pickup for the Denver Nuggets. Jeff Green really showed out for the Brooklyn Nets last year. He's always been one of, I think, the most talented guys in the league for sure. Unfortunately, his production has just never been able to match up to his talent. But he's always been a very good veteran presence for many of the teams that he's been on. And this will just continue moving forward for the Denver Nuggets. They're officially now in win-now mode. And they're just filling in the roster with, those guys.
Speaking of another breaking signing for the Denver Nuggets was actually they re-signed Austin Rivers to a 1-year deal. Again, it's most likely going to be a minimum type of deal, but again, Austin Rivers played pretty well for Denver. He was a buyout pickup that they got, and really helped them, especially when Jamal Murray got hurt. They really needed to pick up.
He really saved them in some playoff games. He was very good for them.
He was very good for them. So obviously, bringing him back definitely helps them run it back even more. Bringing us into the next few signings, obviously the first one, the Utah Jazz. They signed Mike Conley to a 3-year, $72.5 million contract. I got no issues with this deal. To be honest with you, I think this is a pretty fair deal. About $23 to $25 million a season. I honestly thought this was something that Kyle Lowry was going to sign for, but Mike Conley ended up doing it anyways. But I think it's a very good deal for the Utah Jazz and for Mike Conley.
Yeah, man. The Utah Jazz pretty much had no options at this point. Except to do this deal with Mike Conley, and they have no options outside of that. So for Mike Conley, he obviously wants to. He's a guy that wants to stay in the same situation, and not to mention the fact that Utah's looking to compete now for a championship, and Mike Conley is a huge part of that. So for Mike Conley and for the Utah Jazz, it works out well for both of them. Now again, the injuries with Mike Conley is a problem at this point. That's that one impediment for them moving forward, especially to contend for a championship. However, again, for both sides, I think there wasn't that many choices.
But it's pretty fair in terms of what they've come to. It's a pretty fair contract. Yeah. And again, it's not anything long term, and it's pretty movable as well. So not a bad move by the Utah Jazz. Which brings us into the final team we kind of want to talk to, at least for the time being, until there's more news that comes out. But we want to talk about the Dallas Mavericks and some of their signings. Obviously, the best signing. This is the best signing of the offseason, hands down. The Dallas Mavericks re-signed Boban Marjanovic to a 1-year deal because Boban's just a savage. He's just going to take 1-year deal. And he's a go, man. A plus signing, bro. He needs to go. You gotta bring back Boban.
I mean, listen, he started for them in the playoffs. He played a huge role for them, and he's definitely one of the best locker room guys in the league as well.
Absolute best.
So, it definitely made sense for the Dallas Mavericks to re-sign him. The big one that happened for them is they re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr. on a 4-year, $74 million contract. Now, this is relatively the same amount of money that he was making previously last year. He did say he wanted a pay raise. He didn't get a pay raise, but he definitely got a long-term contract for pretty much the same amount of money. And this makes sense from both sides' perspectives. Again, the Dallas Mavericks need Tim Hardaway Jr. They need that secondary scorer, especially if Kristaps Porzingis is not going to be that guy moving forward. And then for Tim Hardaway Jr., he had a career year next to a facilitator like Luka Doncic. So, again, we've seen the high points of Tim Hardaway Jr.'s career. We've seen the low points. And again, he wants to be, I think, for himself, maximized as much as possible. And arguably the best situation for him at this point in his career is to stay with the Dallas Mavericks and to play with Luka Doncic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's had some of his best years of his career playing in Dallas, and it makes total sense for him to stick around in Dallas. And again, he signed for pretty much the same money that he was making before, which again helps Dallas a lot, especially if they want to make some other moves in this offseason. Speaking of another move that the Dallas Mavericks made, again, another signing that happened right before we hit record. Reggie Bullock signed a deal with the Dallas Mavericks. It was a 3-year deal worth about $38.5 million. Honestly speaking, I like the signing. I do. Reggie Bullock is a shooter. can really shoot the ball well. Again, another floor spacer for Luka Doncic, and relatively affordable as well.
Yeah, and he's a good defender as well. He was definitely one of the most important locker room guys for the New York Knicks last year. And he just brought that veteran presence. He brought that tough presence to the New York Knicks, which they really needed. And he was one of their leaders in that locker room, like I just said. For the Dallas Mavericks, you're going to get another two-way guy that can shoot the ball, who can space the floor, who can play well next to Luka Doncic, and who's also going to help out in the locker room moving forward. So I think this was just a very good pickup for the Dallas Mavericks. It's on a 10-year, $10 million per year, pretty much.
It's a pretty good signing. But overall, these were some of the most notable signings that we wanted to bring up that have happened so far. Again, more will probably happen by the time this episode's out there, but these are some of the ones that we did want to talk about in this episode. Finally, to kind of end off this crazy episode, we want to talk about some of the trades that actually happened over this past week, and there was a lot of big ones. The first one that we want to talk about is probably the biggest trade that happened.
Definitely the biggest.
Definitely the biggest. It's the Los Angeles Lakers trading for Russell Westbrook. From the Washington Wizards. So obviously the Lakers get Russell Westbrook, a 2024 second round pick and a 2028 second round pick. And the Washington Wizards receive Kyle Kuzma, Montrezl Harrell, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, the 22nd pick in the 2021 draft, which they used to draft Isaiah Jackson,
who went to the Pacers,
who was then flipped over to the Pacers. But the Lakers pretty much gave up all their depth. They gave up on Kyle Kuzma, which I kind of agree with. They finally let KCP go. They traded away Montrezl Harrell to get Russell Westbrook. Now, this is just such a Lakers move to make. Go out, get a huge name, get an LA native star player in Russell Westbrook. Who cares about fit? They'll figure it out. And that's where we're kind of at. The Lakers got Russell Westbrook with LeBron James, with Anthony Davis. Sounds really cool, except out of those three, LeBron's the best shooter, which...
Again, before the moves that they made today, LeBron was the best three-point shooter on the team. Now, if you go back to last year's playoffs, the one reason why they struggled mightily was because they had absolutely no shooters. Now, for the Lakers, you give up your best three-point shooter by far in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. You ship him out, not to mention the fact that he was a great defender for you as well. And you add Russell Westbrook. Now, again, like Hani mentioned, the names are great. It sounds superstar, it sounds Hollywood, all of that. Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Anthony Davis. The one thing about this team is they're going to have to run, and they will run. They will be devastating in transition, no doubt about that. But when you get to the playoffs are all about half-court games. Now, again, if there's anybody that can make this work, it's LeBron James. But LeBron James is not superhuman, okay? LeBron James is not going to be able to run this team to perfection, unfortunately. And when you have a guy like Russell Westbrook also clogging up space for you, it's not gonna be a good fit, unfortunately. I do not believe in this move, especially when you look at the fact that how the Lakers actually defended Russell Westbrook 2 years ago in the playoffs. Teams are gonna do the exact same thing to the LA Lakers, especially now when you have Anthony Davis, a 27% shooter last year from three, and the model to defend LeBron has always been doubling him. So when you double LeBron, when LeBron's doubled for you as the Lakers, who are you going to kick it out to? And, the only options they have right now are guys like Wayne Ellington and Trevor Ariza. It's not great for the Lakers.
Again, Russell Westbrook will definitely help the Lakers in the regard of getting a guy who can score and get buckets while LeBron's on the bench. And I definitely think that's a big help for the Lakers. But in terms of his fit with LeBron and AD on the court, it just doesn't make a ton of sense in terms of how they're going to make this work. Obviously, I think Russ is going to have to handle the ball. You can't have him as a spot-up shooter. I think the pick and roll with him and Anthony Davis would probably be the best bet in terms of what they're going to use as an offensive
But again, if everyone can help off of their mans on pick and rolls,
yeah,
what are your pick and rolls going to be?
Yeah, but that also could mean that they're going to kind of alleviate some pressure on LeBron, making him more of a spot-up guy. That could be a possibility, but again, in terms of just its sheer fit, it just doesn't make a ton of sense for the Lakers to have made this move.
The one side note is that this officially means Anthony Davis is going to have to run at center, because there's no way he can run at power forward with this lineup. He has to be a center pretty much full time. Flipping things over to the Washington Wizards and what they got for Russell Westbrook, I think this was probably the best package they could have gone for a guy like Russell Westbrook, whose value, again, it was great for the Wizards and everything he meant for them last year. But again, his value around the league is not great. He's on a huge contract, and he's a
I'm
declining
surprised they
superstar,
moved it.
right?
I'm surprised they found.
They were able to move John Wall, a dead contract like John Wall's, for pretty much a young player in Kyle Kuzma, who, despite the fact that he's made a lot of mistakes in his career, he's another young guy that has a lot of potential. He does have a lot of potential. You also got a former sixth man of the year in Montrezl Harrell, who can, at the very least, put up like 15 points a game for you. You got a nice 3-and-D player like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And so, again,
they can still flip these guys, too.
Exactly. So, turning, in essence, John Wall into this package, pretty solid.
It's not bad. It's not a bad return. Obviously, again, we all know how I feel about Kuzma, but I think Kuzma out of LA, I think, you know, he does have some potential. Maybe he'll be developed, actually given an opportunity to develop. So hopefully he'll get that opportunity. Obviously, Montrezl Harrell just did not work for the Lakers at all. I think he will probably be flipped again if I'm not mistaken. I think the Wizards might flip him or they might keep him. And so same thing with KCP. So again, the Wizards can still make more moves. I'm just still among the perspective that I think the Wizards should trade Beal and just completely tear it down. But for whatever reason, Beal just loves Washington.
At the very least, they were able to pull off a job to get out John Wall and Russell Westbrook's money.
Yeah.
Pretty solid. I think for the Lakers' perspective, I would give them, what did you say, B-?
That was what I was leaning towards,
okay. So B- for the Los Angeles Lakers. I'd say maybe a
B+.
B+ for the Wizards. Overall, not a great trade. You know, very splashy trade, but not a great trade overall.
It's definitely a Hollywood trade.
Yeah.
Which moves us into the next trade. Now, this trade...
It was surprising.
It was a little surprising, especially considering, you know, the things these two teams were looking for. Now, it's a trade between the Memphis Grizzlies and the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, the Grizzlies were able to get Steven Adams, Eric Bledsoe, the number 10 pick, which they drafted Zaire Williams with, the 40th pick in the draft, which was Jarrett Butler, who was traded to the Utah Jazz, and a 2022 first-round pick, which actually belonged to the Los Angeles Lakers. The Pelicans received Jonas Valanciunas, the 17th pick in the draft, which was Trey Murphy, the 51st pick, which was BJ Boston, who was then flipped over to the Clippers. And it was just an interesting move. So the only thing that I kind of got out of it was the Pelicans wanted to get cap space, obviously try to make a move for like a Kyle Lowry or, you know, a point guard. So they wanted to get rid of the Steven Adams deal. They already didn't like Eric Bledsoe. So getting rid of those two deals made a ton of sense. Now, obviously, they needed to give the Grizzlies an incentive to take on the extra money. So the 10th pick makes sense there. But then they had to give up JV. Now, obviously, I think Memphis liked JV. I think they liked what he was able to bring for them. But in terms of, you know, getting Steven Adams, I think it's a pretty good consolation prize. I think he'll work really well with John Morant. I don't know what they'll do with Bledsoe. They might flip him. They might keep him.
Well, the report is that Eric Bledsoe is not even going to report to Memphis, and Memphis is looking to trade Eric Bledsoe immediately.
Okay. Yeah.
So Eric Bledsoe, again, like you said, was another guy for the New Orleans Pelicans to try and deal out of his money before. I would say this was just a very surprising move overall, given the fact that JV had such a good year for the Memphis Grizzlies. And for them to let him go like that is very surprising. Now, they must have really liked Zaire Williams a lot to give up JV. And not to mention, like you said, you know, getting Steven Adams as a consolation prize is pretty solid. Again, the contract's a bit more hefty. But, you know, in terms of production, you can get a lot of the same production that you did from Jonas Valanciunas. Obviously, the offensive production is not going to be the same.
But for the Pelicans, though, I'm trying to figure out how JV fits with Zion Williamson. And that's the part that's confusing to me. It's just like...
Now, again, JV can space the floor a bit better
than
Steven Adams.
Sure, but in terms of... He's pretty much a similar player to Steven Adams. And I would say worse defensively than Steven Adams, honestly. Yeah, this is just a really weird move. I think Memphis definitely won the trade, in my opinion, at least. I'd have to give Memphis maybe like a B for the move, because I think it's not bad. They definitely got some value. But for the Pelicans, I'd have to say it's a C+. So it's a C+ to a B-.
I would say B-.
Maybe a B-.
Again, it was very, I think, even trade for both teams, but it wasn't. I don't I wouldn't say it was a great a great trade for both teams.
Yeah.
I guess this is one of those deals that we might have to see moving on, moving forward next year and the years beyond. But yeah, it was just a very interesting trade, I think.
Definitely an interesting move. A couple of breaking news, obviously, before we get into the final couple of trades that we have. We have a few signings. The first one is Blake Griffin has agreed to a 1-year deal to stay with the Brooklyn Nets. Brooklyn's just running it back, so who really cares? But the more important one, Norman Powell has agreed to a 5-year, $90 million contract to return to the Portland Trailblazers. You don't want to know something funny? You don't want to know the annual cap hit for this? It's $18 million a season. So it was literally as much as Gary Trent Jr. got. Honestly,
the difference is Gary Trent Jr. is a lot younger than Norman Powell.
But this is also a 5-year deal versus what Gary Trent signed for, which was essentially a 2-year deal. But for Norm, again, he gets the long-term security. He definitely got a significant pay raise than what he was already getting, and he gets obviously maybe a bigger role in Portland as well. So not bad for Norman Powell, not bad for the Portland Trailblazers, who also didn't really have a ton of money to work with to begin with. So clearly, Norm decided he liked Portland, he wanted to stay there, and he committed 5 years to that team. So
again, this was a very expected move to happen. So again, we've talked about this before as well, so it's not a surprising move. But it's a good bring back for the Portland Trailblazers.
Yeah.
The next trade that we're going to talk about quickly is the Josh Richardson trade. So this was a very standard, very simple trade. The Dallas Mavericks received Moses Brown, and in return, the Boston Celtics received Josh Richardson. Now, Moses Brown originally was traded to the Boston Celtics in the Kemba Walker trade, and now the Celtics are flipping him over for Josh Richardson. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Josh Richardson's value is completely tanked from what it once was.
It's gone.
And it's kind of sad, really, because he's looked at as one of the best 3-and-D players moving forward in his young career, but it just hasn't happened. It hasn't clicked for him in his career.
Injuries also played a part.
Injuries have played a part in it, yes. For the Dallas Mavericks to get a young player like Moses Brown, who really shined at the end of the season for OKC.
Yeah. He was in the Al Horford deal.
Yeah, so for them to get a player like him, who has a lot of potential, who really shined to end off the season, moving forward for the Dallas Mavericks, I think is very interesting. And for the Boston Celtics, again, they're trying to compete right now. And Josh Richardson, again, a guy that you can slot in, but the perception of him, I think, is better than the product you usually get.
I mean, he's definitely going to be cheaper than Evan Fournier, which I think is what this was a replacement of. So not bad for the Celtics. I think the Celtics could help Josh Richardson out a little bit. So it might not be all bad for the Boston Celtics. Which brings us into the final trade. Now, this trade is just kind of funny all around, I think. It is the trade between the Sacramento Kings, the Atlanta Hawks, and the Boston Celtics. So the Sacramento Kings, they received Tristan Thompson because the Celtics just dumped him. It was kind of funny because Tristan Thompson could have signed in Toronto, but he decided to go to Boston. And this is what Boston does to you, by the way. They have no remorse. If they don't like you, they'll get rid of you. So Tristan Thompson obviously was traded to the Kings. The Kings obviously flipped DeLon Wright to the Atlanta Hawks, which I actually kind of like. The Celtics ended up getting Chris Dunn, Bruno Fernando, and the 2023 second-round pick. So in terms of this deal, it really wasn't like cap finagling and kind of moving some players around. Obviously, Tristan Thompson just went to the Kings. I think it's just insurance if they lose Rashawn Holmes. DeLon Wright going to the Hawks, I actually really like in terms of bringing some defense behind Trae Young. And Boston getting Chris Dunn. I kind of like that as well for them,
Again, this is a very deep-cut trade, so it's not anything flashy, but, it's another one of those trades that help each team's benches out a little bit more. So for the Celtics, getting a defender like Chris Dunn, works well for them. The Hawks receiving at this point a veteran point guard in DeLon Wright also works well for them. And the Kings receiving, another insurance policy at the big man spot like Tristan Thompson, unless obviously they want to flip him and they can do so and get something back in return for him. So again, this is a very deep cut trade, nothing crazy, but
we thought we'd mention it. But yeah, those were kind of all the moves that have happened so far in day one of free agency. Honestly,
very heavy episode.
Very heavy episode. A lot of things. There's things will still keep coming. I'm still refreshing Twitter, just trying to make sure we don't miss anything. But yeah, definitely a very interesting and very eventful free agency so far. We'll keep you guys updated in our next episodes, obviously, with more signings and more of our thoughts. So definitely stay tuned for that. But if you guys enjoyed this episode, definitely subscribe to the show on all the various podcasting platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, YouTube. Basically, wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us with the Up and Under Podcast. Also, check us out on social media, Twitter and Instagram at UP_N_Podcast, Facebook.com/UpAndUnderPodcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news like crazy free agent signings as they occur. So definitely check that out. Also, check out our website, UpAndUnderPodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. So if you don't have time to listen or watch the full episode, you can read about it on our website. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so already. And yeah, man, like I mentioned, we're going to be continuing our free agency and offseason coverage. So stay tuned for future episodes with more signings, hopefully, that will be coming maybe in the next hours.
Probably,
at this rate. Woj and Shams are going to be exhausted by the end of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys all in the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.